All right. It looks as if we are live. Can you feel that tension in the air? That is us going live. I'm going to give it a couple of minutes here. It's 5 o'clock on the nose, but we've got an hour and a half, and I've got a bunch of points I want to go through with you. Then I've got 10 people whose books I want to look at, and then we're going to take some Q&A. But I want to give it just a couple of minutes here and see where people are checking in from. Here's a place I've never heard of, Gabriola Island in BC, one of the Gulf Islands. I love BC. I was just talking about BC yesterday with somebody else, saying how much I like it there. Don't worry, I'm not planning on moving there. And if I do, I'm going to secretly slip in and not tell anyone. But the pesky Canadians, have made it pretty hard for us Americans to get citizenship there in good old Canada, but I don't hold it against you. So San Pedro, California. Mumbai, no way. San Pedro and Mumbai, almost exactly the same. Little known fact. I want to say appreciate everybody taking the time to tune in here. We've got a little action-packed event, Edit Book Design, hosted by me. I'm Dan from Blurb, as many of you know. Ithaca, New York's coming in, Montreal, Annapolis, Maryland, Bedford, Ontario. Man, Canada is representing, and then Querétaro, Mexico, Te Amo, Mexico, and then New Hampshire, Vancouver. Yeah, I'm not sure what's up with the Canadian contingent, but you guys are well represented here. Also want to thank, behind the scenes, we have Air and Michelle, and there would not be a presentation tonight without those two, who are basically coordinating everything behind the scenes, but also doing all of the promotion and the logistics and the marketing for events like this. So thanks to both of them for being here. Otherwise, you would be stuck with just me, and the odds of this working would be almost nil. Okay. Couple of things we're going to talk about first before we get started here. And these are just some general tips, and I'm going to share my screen in a minute and go through everyone's work, but there's a couple of things I want to, a top 10 list that I go through often at the beginning of these presentations. If you've been here before, which some of you have, because I'm also looking at work from people whose work I've looked at before, which is always fun to see your progression. But you've seen most or heard most of this list before. And then, just for fun, I have another list for you about book design in particular, which is really what today's talk is about. And let me just double check here and make sure that there's nothing in the chat here that I'm missing. All right, we're good. Hang on 1 second. Okay. When it comes to doing a presentation like this or doing a review like this, number one is I'm not here to make a negative impact on you. I'm not here to crush your work. I'm here to support what you've done so far and help you build on it. Because when it comes to making books, everything is about revision. It's about, basically, books aren't published on the first draft. Books are published after many, many revisions, whether that's a photo book or a wordy book. You know, authors typically do not write a novel on the first draft. It's called a first draft for a reason. They do a second draft and a third draft, and it gets edited. So I'm not here. I'm just basically here to give you positive support. Number two, anytime you send your work out into the ether, whether it's a photograph or a book spread like you've sent tonight, you always want to have your name on the files. And I have to say that every single person whose book I chose to look at had their name on their files. So give yourself some credit. You did well in making sure that your name's on the files, because what if a book publisher saw one of these spreads and said, hey, I really want to publish this book, and then went to the spread and there was no contact information and no metadata, and they couldn't figure out who the author was. So I'm sure that's happened many, many times. I know it's happened with photography, so you all did a great job with that. Number three, don't submit huge files, and none of you did. Although these were book spreads, a lot of times we're doing these films where it's just straight still images. And sometimes people send these massive files, which I could turn around. And if I was a nefarious character, I could print those. I could even make a book of those and say that it was mine. Not that I would ever do that. If I have an ongoing conversation with you, I may or may not look at your work on this go round, but we're going to do many more of these in the future. So if I don't get to you tonight, I will at some point down the road. Also, submit more than one image, which all of you did really well. There were a couple of people who submitted that only submitted 1 or 2 spreads, and it's really hard for me to get a gauge of where you're at over an entire publication with 1 or 2 spreads. So all of you submitted, most of you anyway, submitted the maximum number of files, which was great to see. And also tonight, one of the things I'm also happy to say is that most of you avoided random. You actually had themes to all of the projects that you sent in, which is great. And another way of saying this is you had a story or you had something to say. And every time I talk to photographers about books now, I'm always, they're probably tired of me saying this, but story is really important. It's more important than the photography, is the story that you're trying to tell. The photography supports the story, but often we're starting with that narrative. We have something to say. We want to tell a story. And so it's not just random images from here and there. You want a theme. Lastly, which doesn't really apply here, although sometimes it applies in the sense of captions. What equipment you use, what technology you use, that doesn't really matter to the viewer. So you don't necessarily need to include that in your books unless you are making a book for other photographers. And that's a completely valid thing. If you're a street photographer and you want to make a book for the street photography community who might be very curious about what kind of equipment and techniques you're using, then you could include that information in your book. But if you're making a book for the general public, they don't really care and they don't really know about that stuff. This last point, two more points. The second to last here is very important. And some of you did this really well, and others I'm going to have to, give you a little tough love. Right. When you're doing a book, whether it's a photography book or an illustrated book or non-illustrated book, writing to someone like me who's about to look at your work, the more you can write, the more information you can give me, the better it is. Some of you wrote long explanations of what you were doing, which is great. And other people gave me the, 1 sentence kind of thing. And I'm going to make sure that I ask you for more. And the last thing is, when it comes to making books, don't rush trying to be good. Because I always tell people, if whatever level of photography you have attained, you will spend equal or more time becoming that level of bookmaker. But don't look at that as a discouraging thing. Look at it as a challenging thing. I've made 300 plus books with Blurb. Some of them, a handful of them, are decent. They're pretty good. And then there's some that are absolute train wrecks. And some of those train wrecks I made in the not too distant past. So you're always learning. There's so much to take in when it comes to making books. So don't rush trying to be an excellent bookmaker right off the bat. Enjoy the process. Have fun. Okay. How's everybody doing? Everybody good still here? I've got another little list of things I want to go through. This is book specific. I've got my trusty set of notes here. If you have questions, put them in the chat, because we're going to get to them at the end. And I want to make sure that if there's something out there that you've really want to get answered, I want to try to get to as many of those as possible. So put them in the chat. Number one, I just mentioned this a second ago. I was at a party the other night and I ran into a photographer, an older woman here in Santa Fe who I absolutely love. And she did a book and we were talking about that book. And I said to her, "How long did you work on that book?" And she just immediately came back and she said 7 years. And I was like, no, not the project, the book. And she said, yeah, the book. It took 7 years. And she goes, "I don't know if I would ever do it again, because it took so long and it was like so arduous." But that meant 7 years of revision, of trial and error, of doing a draft and then making changes and doing another draft. It's a beautiful book, by the way. It's about an environmental situation that happened here in Santa Fe a few years ago, dealing with a fire. Gorgeous book, but 7 years, that kind of gives you a gauge of, how much time people are spending out there to put books together. Now, that's one side of the equation. Michelle and I from Blurb were talking about this right before this call started. We love taking smaller, less consequential projects and just making small books for ourselves. So you don't necessarily have to work for 7 years to do a book. You could do a book in 7 days. A photographer just sent me a book. He was leaving Taos and came across some wild horses and did probably a 20-minute shoot with these horses and turned it into a small book. I love that. That encapsulates that little experience of being out there. So every one of these books, every one of our books starts with a first draft. And that's how I look at the books that we're going to look at later today. Number two, here's the little tough love. Less is more. Okay. Cliche alert for sure. Less is more. But when it comes to making a book, this is absolutely true, especially in the attention economy, because this thing right here is so powerful and so all-consuming for us that when you put a book out into the world, in essence, what you're asking from the general public is, I want your undivided attention. I want you to look at what I made, which means they have to put this down. So less is more means if you're doing a book and you have, let's say, 300 or 400 images in that book, that is really too much at this point in time. If I was doing a photography book, and most of the photography books that I have on my shelf here, 50 pictures, 50, that's kind of at the upper end of the scale. And if you're doing a short project like this Taos Horses, for example, that could be an 8 or 10 picture book. But depending on how you design it, that's all you need. So just keep that in mind. Less is more. If you're making a book that has millions of images, that's going to be a challenge. And also, this applies to books about illustration. It applies to books about design, really anything. If you're writing a wordy book, it's just going to depend on the level of story or how many stories you're putting in. For example, my mother wrote poetry, and when my mom asked me about doing a book, she was going to use hundreds of poems in this book. And I said, show me your top 25. And she said, that's impossible. And I said, no, that's called editing. And I'm not going to let you squirrel out of this. And so I kind of, badgered my mom for a long time until she cut that down to 25 of what she considered were her best poems. That's kind of what I'm talking about. Because remember, even if you do a book of 25 poems, if it's a poem on one side on a left-hand page, let's say, and the right-hand page is blank, right there's 50 pages already. Then when you add in sort of the introduction, the essay at the front, the dedication, the copyright, your book is now up to 60, 70 pages. That's plenty for a book of poetry. And then it allows you to do a volume 2 and a volume 3. So these are digestible size books as opposed to doing a book that has like 500 poems in it, which might be overwhelming for people. So number 3, for you photographers out there, editing is an art form. Yes, that's another cliche, but it is 100% true. So I have a trivia question for everyone. For those of you photographers out there, you might be familiar with a book called The Americans by a Swiss photographer named Robert Frank. This is one of the most famous photo books in history. Robert Frank shot 72,000 images for the project when he drove across America and he did this famous project. 72,000 images. How many were in the book? So go in the chat. Somebody give me an idea. He shot 72,000 pictures. How many pictures do you think made the final cut in The Americans? Give me a number. Frederick says 80. That's a good guess. Who else? 120. Sarah's got 120. 70, 40, 44, 65. Okay, you guys are close. There were 51 images in the book. So 72,000 frames, 51 total in the book. That's called editing. And I've also seen the contact sheets from that project. And there were quite a few images in the contact sheets that I thought were as good or better than the images in the book, which tells you how much thought was put into the process of them choosing what they did. That's kind of what we're all after, whether you're doing a wordy book or a design book or a photo book. You really want to put that kind of thought towards the process. Number 4, type is a language. Typography is a huge part of the book, whether you're doing an illustrated book or not. Type is a separate language. And I went to photography school. We had absolutely zero training in typography whatsoever. So when I started to make books, I had no background in typography. I really had no idea what I was doing. So the size of the type, the density of the type, the placement of the type, it is like a secondary dialect in the language of bookmaking. And it's something that can take a lot of time and practice. My point to you is you want to be very conscious of as to what type you're using, what typefaces, why you're using them, why they have a connection to your story, and not just random typefaces that you pulled from a drop-down menu because it happened to be at the top of the list. Type whatever consideration you give to the photography or the other illustrated aspects of the book, the type deserves just as much thought. And we can talk more about that. Number 5 is visual hierarchy. And I'll show you some of this when we're looking at books. Visual hierarchy is what the brain does when it turns the page of a book and starts to see the design elements. So for example, let's say I turn the page and it's a chapter head, and there's a photo on the left-hand page that's black and white, and then there's a title and a chapter and some copy. The brain sees all of those things and says, oh, this is a chapter head. When I see that typeface at that size with a photo, I know that I'm looking at a chapter head. So keeping consistent with that for the rest of the book, the brain has already created a visual hierarchy for those elements. So it's about staying consistent, which is the next point. If you are using borders on your photos, not using borders, if you're doing a bleed, not doing a bleed, keeping things consistent is really important for the viewer so that when they're turning the page, each page is not completely different than the page before, where there is no visual hierarchy, where every time they turn the page, their brain has to now try to figure in the new information they're looking at instead of having a consistency to it. Point number 7, some of you have done this really well, and others maybe you're struggling, is whether or not to use color and black and white in the same book. You can, and I've seen it done very well, but it's much more difficult than choosing one of those, color or black and white, and sticking with it because, again, consistency. Because you as a photographer may look at this and say, well, I know why I did color and black and white, but remember, the average person might not be a photographer and they don't know why you're using color and black and white. So I often just choose one, stick with it. But if you don't, just make sure that you're using both of those consistently. So again, maybe the chapter heads are in black and white and the other internal pages are in color, just so there's a consistency to it. Number 8 is I often design my cover last. I'll do a quick mock-up of what I think the cover will be. Then I'll do the rest of the book and I come back to the cover because oftentimes that first mock-up, that first draft of my cover is not good enough. It's too expected, it's too boring, it's lacking something, but just doing a mock-up allows me to move on without thinking my cover has to be perfect before I do the rest of the book. I've seen that really stymie a lot of people who they can't get the book done because they can't get past the cover. Number 9, captions, page numbers, and copyright. Do you need them? No, you do not. Most of the time, you don't need captions, you don't need page numbers, and you don't need your copyright in there unless you're putting that book out into the public and you're really worried about someone stealing that. Page numbers only if you're referencing those page numbers at some point in the book. You can also, and captions, I would much prefer to see an index in the back that has caption information as opposed to a caption underneath every single image, which is a real distraction. And I'll show you some samples of this in a minute to kind of show you, again, when I was in photography school, they told us, oh, you got to have page numbers, you got to have captions, you got to put your copyright in there. And then I realized 20 years later, because I'm a bit slow, I realized I don't think I need all this stuff. And in fact, I think a lot of it is a distraction. So that's my top 10 list, people. And let me just double check here to make sure I'm not missing anything. Nope, all is well. Are you... hang on a second. Let me just take a look here to see if we got any questions when you're preparing your photos for book, right? We'll get to the questions at the end. I'm glad to see you sending some questions in. And let's get started on the presentation. Let me open this and let me share my screen. Window. All right. Here we go. We're going to start with Peter Brandt. Does that sound good? Peter Peter did a pretty good job here in terms of giving me information about what this story was about. He's got a title, From My Window, a photojournalistic style book documenting what's happening today on the Hudson River alongside Manhattan. I moved into an apartment with a view of the Hudson, a view I'd never had before. The river was crossed at the George Washington Bridge just to get in and out of Manhattan. Discovered the Hudson is still a major highway/waterway. Soft cover, 116 pages, 8.5 by 11. So it's a magazine, and it's got 303 photographs. So, Peter, we got to talk about that. 303 photos is a lot. I would suggest cutting that way down, but let's have a look. Let's look at these pages, and then I'm going to come back to start over. Okay. And we're going to do this with everybody. So he's got his cover and his back cover right there. Got some Hudson here, action along the Hudson. Got his copyright in the back. And this is kind of nice. You know, he's giving us a location as to where he's shooting from. And got some images here. Look at that. I love tankers. I love big ships like that. Got a bunch of action. Okay. We are back to the cover. All right. So the cover itself is not bad. This image is, you know, it's kind of cool. You got this old schooner. I'm not sure that's the right term, but, you know, this old triple mast, beautiful ship. I like the placement of the ship on the cover. I'm going to move this real quick right here. I think this placement here with the type and how the type is stacked here is pretty nice. I like that. I'm not in love with the font, Peter. I think you can find a better font for this. That's something a little bit more dramatic than what this is, but I do like how you've stacked it along here right above the Statue of Liberty. I think that that's great. Photography by Peter Brandt. I might reduce that in size just a little bit, and also just weight it a little more this direction so that the photography part doesn't get lost in the black right here. And the back is pretty simple. You might be able to spice up this back cover just a little bit. And let me go here. Oops, sorry. Do this and then go here. Okay. Super simple page. I like this. I like a single image. You're not going to lose anything in the gutter. You're at least not going to lose enough to, you know, down here in the middle, I still get an idea of what this is, even if this is the gutter. It is an interesting crop with, you've left a white border across the top and the page numbers, which I really don't think, unless you're going to reference those at some later date, I don't think you need those page numbers. I would probably move this picture up and four-way bleed it all the way across the page. I don't think you necessarily need to leave that white border because you don't have a consistent border throughout the pages of the book. So if you had, if that white border across the top of the pages was across all the pages, then I would say, okay, perfect. But as you can see here, you've got a two-way bleed on this photo. So you've got a border on this side and a border on this side, obviously, but only a two-way bleed. So the borders are kind of inconsistent. I would think about choosing one and keeping consistent with it. I'm a border person as opposed to a bleed, but that's a personal preference. The other thing that I would do is, again, I think the type treatment here, you have it centered, and I think a slightly different typeface would be maybe a little bit more catchy here. And also how you've got all the different varying type sizes. So you've got 1, 2, 3, potentially a fourth different type size. I would probably go basically reduce that to 1 to keep it a little more consistent. And here's where we're getting to, I think this page and this page are good examples where, Peter, I think this is where you're getting to the 300 images. And this is a little tricky because when the viewer turns this page, you've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 images and you have text. So it's a lot for people to take in on one page. So what I would do is I would edit these pictures down. I would choose one of these photographs and I would let that photo dominate the page. And if the text is essential text, then I would balance that one photograph with the text. So for example, on this page, I would choose which one of these images is the most impactful. Like I think this one right here, this has great light. That's a very moody looking photograph. And I think that that photo by itself run across the page like this is stronger than looking at all of these images at the same time. Because again, when you turn the page, the viewer doesn't really know where to look because there's so much content on the page. Secondarily, again, this copy, I would probably reduce the width of this text box. Instead of it running all the way across the page, I would think about breaking this into columns. So if you have 2 columns instead of 1, it helps with legibility. And I think you'd be able to compress all of this into 1 column. And again, you have to ask yourself, do I need this copy? Is the copy telling me something that the viewer can't get just by looking at the photographs? So again, captions are there only if there's something that needs to be added that the viewer can't deduce from looking at the photograph. Hopefully that makes sense. Again, look at how easy this picture is to read, how easy this page. You have basically 2 things you're asking me to look at, as opposed to this page, which is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 things that I'm looking at. Now I go boom, and how clean and simple and impactful this is. I would, however, eliminate this, because what this does is creates conflict between where you want me to look, which is right here. That's what this picture is about, are these 3 tankers. But now, because this line is up here, it's pulling my attention away from the photograph and stuck on the type. And there's a better way of, that's a really interesting part of the story, is that it's been a highway for 400 years. That's great. But I would probably put that text and that message on a page by itself so that it doesn't distract from this overall photo, because I really like that photo. This kind of is reflective of some of the pages we saw before, like these. So there's a lot happening. But when I see this page right here, my eye clearly goes right here. That's the most interesting photo. And how great would that be to see that photo like this all the way across? Again, simple, clean, easy to read, impactful. And then again, I probably don't need the caption information at all, and I don't need the page numbers. So it would just be a very simple, clean page that's kind of reminiscent of this one as well. And that's it. I would simplify, I would edit down, maybe spice up that text a little bit just for fun, and you're on your way. So thank you for submitting that. Let me just make sure there's nothing happening here in the chat that we need. Nope, everything is good. Okay, so I'm going to go here and back to here. All right, so we are going on to Sally. So I'm going to start here. Sally has working on a retrospective of my artworks plus my poetry and other word sketches. So Sally, because I like this work and I think you have a pretty diverse set of things that you're making, I would love to see a little more explanation of the kind of things that you're working on and what the goals are, because I see artworks, poetry, and other. So to me, when I read that, I think potentially there's 3 books here and not necessarily 1. So I kind of want to know more about that. So we're going to start here. I'm going to go through these and then come back. There's Love the Journal. Okay, we got some paintings, some baskets. Got some photography, some poetry. And again, more poetry, some photographs. Drum goes dead again. Okay. First off, I love this page. Look how simple and clean and balanced this whole thing feels. Number 1, look at the type treatment. I love the left justified. So I've got this little bit of ragged edge along the right of the text. And I think that kind of raggedy edge is kind of rhymes with the jaggedness of the bark and the trees. But look how balanced this is. You've got 3 photos. They're all related. Tree, 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 with a nice narrow column of text that looks like it's about 10-point typeface. This looks really good. I think that's a pretty balanced, nice page that shows off what you're doing. When we jump to this page, now coming from here, now we've got 2 other forms of content. We've got this journal book on the left, which I'm super intrigued by, and I would love to see more of the journal book, and that could be its own separate book itself, because that stuff is fascinating. I love to see the process. And then we've got this like letterhead that has some writing on here as well. And we go here. Now we're getting into the paintings. I think this is a pretty overall balanced page as well. However, going back to what I said about Peter, when I look at something like this and I look at that and I go, man, I want to see that. I would love to see that larger. So potentially, instead of putting 3 up on the page, you could put 1 up and just let the viewer soak in that 1 painting, as opposed to trying to take in 4 paintings on the same spread. I do like the fact that these baskets are kind of offset with the painting. It kind of shows like objects in a gallery type space. I think this is a good professional image, but I would definitely reduce the overall count of images on the page just to make it a little bit easier for people to consume. And here's where we're kind of getting, I don't know, maybe a little busy for my liking. I kind of like how the text is wrapping around the image, but when we have kind of a floating piece of paper here with an image, there's a lot going on this spread. So I think, like, imagine this page by itself and then this set of content on another spread, so that I'm not trying to read both this and this at the same time. I think when you add this and you add this in and the 2 images, it's a lot. So I would probably break these out into their own separate spreads. And this is going to be kind of a consistent thing that I've seen with a lot of work here, which is a lot of work sort of pressed into very few pages. And I think most of the time, for everybody who submitted work, you really want to give your work a chance to breathe. You want there to be very few elements on a particular page so that the viewer only has to deal with 1 or 2 things. That's a much better, much higher likelihood of getting undivided attention than it is to put so much work on 1 page, because again, it's a bit much for the viewer. But I do like this, so I would just, again, break it out onto its own page. The same thing applies to this. You've got copy, 1 image. So we've got copy here, copy, 1 image, 2 image, 3 image, and copy. It's definitely a lot. So again, I would take what's on this page and I would leave it, and I would then leave this page blank, and I would break out what's on this page and I would put it on its own separate spread. And this would be on the page, and I would have the other page blank, so that there's just makes it a little easier for people to consume. Again, here, I think fewer elements, which is great. I would probably, remember when I mentioned at the beginning the idea of consistency. So imagine if this image was, I don't know, placed in weighted towards the top like this, and then this copy was down here underneath it like this, and then on this page, same thing. So this image was weighted towards the top, and then instead of the type wrapping around, it's consistent like this. I would still probably break these out onto their own pages, because again, it is a lot for somebody to consume at the same page. But again, just keeping it consistency. So instead of 1 image being weighted towards the top and 1 at the bottom, 1 has a 1-way bleed, the other has a 2-way bleed, and the copy is, different on each page. I would just make it consistent. I think it's just easier for people to consume and makes it easier for them to read it. And again, like this to me is magic. I would keep this spread as the barometer for how the rest of that work could look, because this is so easy to consume and so pleasant. When I look at this spread, my eye goes right here. My eye just immediately goes here, and I start reading down. And as I'm reading, I glance out at these images, and that's what we want. We want that copy to really, the story, the message is pulling me in, and then I'm diverting to look at the images. So really nice job on this spread. I think it's a great starting point. So thanks for submitting, Sally. Appreciate that. We're on to David Zimmerly. The Voyage of Erasmus, Book 1, Ottawa to the Arctic. You've got to be kidding me. That sounds like that's a long commute. My wife and I sailed halfway around the world. In InDesign, I designed and photographed the book, and Helga wrote the text. That's super cool. I love the partnership. One person doing the visuals and the other doing the text. And as you can see, there is a ton of text. So tip your hat to Helga for putting that all together. So let's have a look here at the first page. Make sure I'm not missing anything here. All right. Look at, all right, we're going to go through these and then come back. Voyage of Erasmus. Forward by Roy McSkimming. All right. If Cod could speak, a lot of text here. I like the columns. Gotta love the map. Always good. Let's see here. Erasmus got a boat configuration. That's interesting. Labrador. Very nice. That looks like there should be water under that boat, but what do I know? I don't sail. Shaftesbury Inlet, Baffin Island. I like that. I love this. Okay. All right. So this has a super nice look to it. This looks like a sailing magazine or a sailing book. I think he's got an interesting typeface here that I think works. I think the color works as well. And look how the Voyage of is stacked at the top in basically the same typeface as this right here. So there's a nice balance. And then reversed out in white across the bottom is the author and photographer. Also note this in the background on the sail. That's going to come into play here in a minute. But that's nice. It's balanced. It's a good portrait. It shows you both. And that's a very professional looking cover in my mind. So that's a good start. This is the only text that I remember seeing in the book that's not broken into columns. So it's not the end of the world, because I still think this actually works, especially depending on what size publication this is. If this is a magazine, magazines are very flexible, which means you can really open this thing up wide and you're not going to lose anything in the gutter. If this was a photography book that had a hardcover and a stiffer bind, text that runs all the way across the page could be a little tricky to read. So I would think about maybe having a look at what this would look like as 2 columns. But other than that, leave it. Look at this simple photograph. It's a bleed all the way around. He's got his little Roman numeral here at the bottom, but look how easy that is to read. It's like, boom, there's only one thing to look at, which is the ship itself on dry dock or whatever you call it. But also what I mentioned before, look at this, the little detail from the sail. That's nice. That's a nice little contribution there that's consistent throughout the publication. This kind of what I would call, this has a classic look to it. So number one, I love the columns. You know, having the columns, if this was text all the way across the page, it would be completely illegible. So this is a very professional type treatment in terms of using column text. I think it works great. The offset in blue to separate different aspects of the story, that also works. And then there's a drop shadow here on this little text box, which also sets it a third installment to let the viewer know that there's been a change in the text. And also don't forget these little additions here, like the enlarged cap here on the top. That's nice too. And then gotta love the map. And again, remember, single image, left-hand page, single image, left-hand page, consistency to the visuals. Okay. Blue. This is this offset page in blue. This knockout quote. What color did he use for the background? Blue. Consistency. Look at the color consistency here. So there's a method here to the design. And again, we have the little sale accoutrement here at the top, and we have column text. It looks really good. Like, this is easy to read if you're into the sailing community, if you're into adventure trips. This is a very easily digestible thing. And also, he's giving us the required information. The maps are essential. The book, a portrait of the people behind it. We've got all of that covered already. Again, consistency. Blue again. This is for the boat builders out there. This is for fellow sailors. He's giving us a description of what this boat actually is, and then a photograph of it at speed, which frankly doesn't look that fast, but what do I know? It's a beautiful boat though. Again, we have the same little design detail consistent throughout. Everything is consistent. Like, this is kind of what we're after. And again, this is very, word heavy, which is great, but the visuals are easy to read, simple. There's only one at a time on the page. I'm not going to get lost on these pages. So this is a job well done. Same thing, same design, one image. And this I love, to break up the routine of those pages that are text heavy. You come to this. Now, I could, nitpick and say, why not move this to another page so that all I have to look at is right here? Because that's a pretty dramatic scene right there. That's pretty great. Do I need this? Yeah, probably, because people are going to want to know where that is. And he's giving us the location in the Georgian Bay. There is a bit of competition between these two things where my eye goes, I want to look at the boat, but I keep kind of being pulled away by the text. So maybe I would move that to a different page. But again, I'm kind of nitpicking, because after all, this is my call, right? I can do whatever I want. But overall, I think that's super solid. That's good. I mean, David, as a follow-up, you could do a second version of this and just turn everything you've done inside out and start over. You could do one that is visual heavy with minor text, just for fun, to give yourself a challenge. But congrats on the voyage. And yeah, overall, I think this is pretty well done. It's a good place to be. All right, Michael Limon. All right, these are 8 spreads from my book, New York City Streets, published with Blurb. Okay, Michael, we got to have more text. Got to have more of a story. I've seen 100 books on New York City street photography. So what I would love to know is more about why you're doing this, what kind of things you look for on the street, why street photography is the kind of photography that you want to do. Is there a story? What is that story? And also adding a little text in here would be fantastic. And also adding things like an introduction, front matter of the book. So maybe a title page, a half title page, maybe a little bit of history as to the other street photographers that were influential to you. All of that stuff makes it much easier to engage with the work than not having all that stuff. And for all I know, you do have it, you just didn't show it. But that's the kind of things that I'm curious about. So when you're submitting work, and we definitely need more than just, hey, these are 8 spreads for my book, because people want to know the process behind. So this is, we're going to look through these first and then come back. That looks suspiciously like Spencer Platt from Getty, but I could be wrong. Okay. With a beat, we the people. Man on the street, pickleball in the village. All right. Okay. So, love this photo. Just for everybody out there who's watching, I'm going to go through these again. Look at how simple these are. Just look how simple. In terms of the visuals, there is one thing on every spread that we have to look at. just one, which means my attention, when I turn this page, goes right here. That's what he wants. That's what he wants us to do, is to look right there. That's, in terms of an illustrated book or a photography book, that's kind of what we're after here. Again, simple, one thing to look at. I'm going to go back and start over. What I don't really need is this. The captions are not really giving me anything that I can't, like, is it important to know that this woman is on Orchard? Not really, because I love this photo. And what happens is, how do you not engage with that gaze and that crop? Look how simple, clean, it's razor sharp. Her eyes are like incredibly, I'm just riveted by this. And what this does is it pulls my attention away. So, Michael, what I would do is if you think this is important, you could put a number here, like an actual number sign with a numeric value, and then index these in the back. So in case people wanted to know that information, but even that is going to pull attention away. So I would probably, that's the one thing that jumps out at me, is to get rid of these captions. I just don't think that these are essential. I think they pull away from the photographs. And also I think the typeface, they're too large. If I was going to do this, if you really want to put them in there, choose a non-bold typeface, make it much, much smaller, and then turn the density from black into closer to page white, so that it's definitely not as distracting. Because again, I'm not, learning a ton from these captions. They're telling me what I can already see. I love the simplicity of the pages. And also for everybody, notice his border. He's shooting black and white. He's bordering these images, which I really like. I think the bordering them is great, but look at the consistency of the borders. That's what I was talking about before. Now, look at this picture here. There's nothing page white around the outside of this image. Maybe that sign, but it's not being cut off. But if we go back here, this is close to page white at the top, but there's still detail. So if he puts a border on like he has here, if this image has no detail in the sky, then it will blend with the page white and you won't be able to see the border. So he's done a really good job of making sure that there's detail in these areas that are close to page white. So nice job on that as well. And super, super simple. This is really about Michael saying, hey, I want you to look at my photographs, and I want the photographs to speak for themselves. And a really good designer told me when I first started making books, he's like, if your photography is good, get out of the way and let it speak. You don't have to over design. And I think this is a really good example of that. Super simple. Again, nice. It's a nice sort of start on the body of work. Again, I would love to see a few pages at the front of this giving me more of a background on who you are as a photographer and why you're doing street photography, why you're in New York, and if there's a story here, and also what your goal is moving forward. But otherwise, I love the simplicity, clean. I would just really reconsider those captions. Okay, let's see here. We are on to Dean. I'm checking my phone to make sure nobody's paging me like, hey, I can't see your screen, but everything seems fine. Dean's going with just a one name. Like, why do we need a second name? He's the prince of photography. So Dean, thanks for sending stuff in. Present a variety of my work, as the title indicates, life as I see it, to get some of my work out that otherwise would never see the light of day. That's a great point. I think anyone who's been a photographer in the digital age has at one time or another looked at their computer and said, geez, I wish there was a way to get this stuff off my hard drive and out into the world. And I think making a publication is a great place to begin. So let's start here, and we're going to go through these and come back. Life as I see it. Highway 64 in Iowa. Okay. Here we go. I think Dean already knows what I'm going to say about some of this. Okay, here we go. There we go, Dean Traver. Photographic story. Look at that. Okay. So there's a lot I like here. This cover to me is fantastic. This is really nice. I mean, I like this kind of Merlot color. It's an atypical color. I think a lot of people would look at work and never think to choose a color like this. I really like it. And I think the yellow actually accents this color extremely well. And I think too, if you looked deep inside this photograph, like right here, you might find that same yellow, which is a nice little reference. I think this is a really balanced cover. Again, his name, the typefaces you've chosen, love this. Simple, great. This looks like something you'd see at the local bookstore or on a magazine rack. And also, it's just nebulous enough for me to not know exactly what's in this. Even though there's a landscape on the cover, I don't know. Maybe there's something else on the inside, and that right there is a good thing because now I'm intrigued and I'm going to pick it up and open it, which is what we're all after, is for people to open up our books. Okay, let's move on. Okay, Dean, what I said before. So on one hand, awesome. Single image across the entire page. I've got nothing else to look at. I love that because we got this beautiful landscape. We've got great light. There's a lot to take in here. This, not sure I need that because it kind of distracts me. I'm kind of looking down here a lot, and that's something potentially. You got page numbers as well. You could reference these page numbers in the back with an index so that I don't have to look at a caption. I can basically just enjoy the photograph. But again, that's up to you. I think the type treatment that you had on the cover is really nice. And I'd love for you to keep that consistent with your page numbers and the captions. Although one of the things that I do think you've done really well with the caption is you've got this in bold italic, and you see how it's offset from Iowa Highway 64. That's a really nice little subtle sort of improvement. It's not all the same typeface in bold or italic. You've also got this little divider here in the middle. That's pretty nice. I'm not sure you necessarily need the black borders around, but that's a personal preference, but I could probably skip those. Dean's doing this well, okay? One photograph, one photograph, one photograph. There is a couple of things about this that I think could be slightly improved. Again, the black borders that you have on here, that's a personal preference. I don't really need those. And again, you've done well in designing this, but again, I'm not sure it's required because I can kind of get everything from the photo that you're telling me right here. I don't know it's Iowa, but it's not really critical. I think it's just, let me see the photograph and this we can get to later. I would probably reduce the type size here. I would make it smaller. And you've got this information, which I think you also have at the back. So what I would do is I would keep this copy and I would keep this, but I would eliminate this because you already have it at the back. And I would think about a different typeface here. I think that sort of cursive typeface, not my favorite. I think there could be something that you might find out there that's a little better for that, but I like sort of this poetry style use of text, not too shabby. Okay, Dean, this is where what we talked about before. There's a lot going on here. And the thing is, I don't think you're giving your photography enough credit. What a spread like this feels like to me, which is a good thing, is, and this applies to everybody who submitted work, this feels like excitement. This is Dean saying, I'm super excited about this work. I want to share everything with you. I just want to do it all on one page. And my advice to you is I'm super glad that you're excited and that you want to share this. Just break it out on its own page. so that we only have one thing to look at or two things to look at as opposed to, 4 photographs and 4 captions. It's a lot because, again, look at this. I mean, look at that light. Great light. I like this image in particular where it kind of wraps in. Your eye goes through this old covered bridge. Anybody who's been driving around rural America, these old structures are fantastic. And, this is the kind of photo with the flag and the old tractor that is perfect to offset with a page of text. So maybe this by itself on across the gutter. So imagine this photo run like this, right? And then text here, or even just a little copy block of text at the bottom down here, like something like that would simplify this spread a lot. Same here. Again, there's just so, why not slow it down, break it out onto their own pages and let people just look at these one at a time. If you go to the photography or a bookstore and go to the art book section and you look at photography books, you have to ask how many books look like this and how many books would have each of these photos broken out on their own page. And I think you'll find that the vast majority of books would have the images broken out. It just makes it easier for the reader to consume. I like this. Look at your type treatment. You've basically got the same with type boxes here as here. I love this for all of you who did a good job of sending in what your projects are about. And for those of you who didn't really give us enough information, this is really important. I can't tell you how many. I'll give you an example. My website, one of the most trafficked pages is the About page. And I think that's true of a lot of sites because people want to understand who they're dealing with. And this is also a great addition. So Michael, the last work we looked at, Michael, this is the kind of stuff that I'm looking for, where it's about you and about the projects and about why I'm looking at what I'm doing. Again, Dean, you had this here, which is why I wanted you to eliminate it on the other page because you got it here on your copyright page. So not bad. And love this. I love seeing the author. My favorite page in National Geographic magazine is the on assignment page, which shows either a writer or a photographer in the field and gives you a little background on who that person is. When I first got into photography, my grandparents had all the Nat Geos and I would go through every issue and I'd go straight to the on assignment page because I wanted to be those people. So I really like this. And as a final touch, I like the dedication as well. I would probably change that typeface. But other than that, I like it. I don't see, to me, I love seeing dedications because it really gives me an idea who you were influenced by. So all of that is fine and dandy. Again, just break it out, let it live on its own page. I mean, look at this picture. Look at that. That's gorgeous. I just want to see it bigger. I want to see it like boom across the page like this. That's what I would do. But other than that, and again, like in terms of barometer, that's fantastic. I would keep this spread in mind and let it influence the rest of the spreads. So good job, Dean. Good job. All right, Lisa. So Lisa, I'm not going to read all of this, but for everybody who's watching, this is the kind of thing I'm talking about. Like this gives me a really good idea who Lisa is, what she's doing, and why. Super important. So, and then she's got a question about Blurb down here, which you can hopefully we can answer at another time. But she talks about being an amateur photographer and loves to combine passion for photography with the love of travel. I think there's a lot of people in the same boat. The goal here was to improve editing skills, but also to get my photos out of Lightroom and give them a new life, which is exactly what we were talking about a minute ago. So that's exactly what is a commendable goal. So she wants to hear thoughts on a narrative coherence of the sequence and the layout. So let's have a look. Melting Pot, Malaysia. Here we go. Melting Pot. I want this guy. He looks relaxed. I want some of that in my life. Look at that. I like that. Let's all do an offsite in Malaysia. I'm ready. Okay, nice, 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 nice. Okay, so Lisa, I'm going to tell you some of the similar things that I've told other folks, which is if you look at some of these spreads, there's a lot going on. But if we go back to the cover, you've got a little, whoops, sorry. You've got a little gap here in the middle. I think both of these images would be better if they were bordered. So reduce the size a little bit and have a nice white border on the outside. I think that would take the energy that's in these images and it would condense it in a way that gives them more power, but also separates them, because these are kind of running together, and I don't want them to run together. I think that they're strong enough to live on their own. Secondarily, that little white border is going to play off the white text. It's going to be a nice balance between those two. I think this is a solid image for the cover. I like the human element. I'm much more of a fan of adding a human element as opposed to non-human stuff. And I think this image works well for the back cover. Here's where we're getting, again, there's a lot going on here. So some of the things that you've done well are to keep the borders consistent here. Now you're talking about borders on all these. We don't have one page that's bleeding off in two sides and the other page with a white border. So I like how you've done this. But I kind of look at what would this look like if it was just this image and then a little bit of copy down here, just a little something, a little story, so that when I turn this page, the only thing I have to consume is right here, and then break these out onto separate pages. You can see a consistency here of what I'm suggesting to folks. Go back here, look at these borders. I would think about using the same border on these pictures here. Again, I think a little white border here would probably make this better. I like this as a background. You've kept consistent here with your titles across and the width of the text column, which is good. This is easy to read, easy to consume. I would just think about bordering that photo to keep consistent with the others. And again, just a lot to look at here. So I think I would reduce this to, one image, maybe two images, and that's it. You did kind of skip here from look at this border and then look at this photo. I would make those two the same. I would use the exact same photo container to make sure that these images are the same size, again, to keep consistency. Look how easy and simple and good and impactful that is. Could you put a border on it? Yep. I would have a look to see what it would look like with a border, but again, that's kind of personal preference. But it's so simple. My eye just goes right here. I just want to go floor by floor and like zoom in and see people living their lives. That's a good, strong, simple, good image to choose to run across the gutter. Again, there's all three of these pictures are worth looking at. It's which ones do you want to include by themselves and then break these out into subsequent spreads. It's a lot. So what will happen is the human eye will always go to the hottest part of the frame, which is right here. That's where the eye will typically tend to go. And the second place it will go is the upper right-hand corner. And so pictures like this might get lost on a page like this, because if you have a hot spot like this and a face like this, they're going to pull and they're going to overpower this. And if this is a really important image, then you have to make sure that it's on a spread by itself. Again, I would take this as my prototype vertical image, and I would use that same. Instead of bleeding it off here, I would keep consistent and use the same image, but I would use it in that same size. I think this is an image that demands to be by itself. I really like this picture. It's got a great balance. I love the mural. I love the dynamic. I love the two people and the offset of orange against an entirely greenish photo. I love the dynamic element of the railing. I think that photo should be by itself. And then this, look at this photo. Like, that's just way too good to be the third rung on the totem pole on this page. Now, look at what you did. You went back to that original vertical container, which is exactly what you should have done. And also, people, look, you've got this consistent shape here, and you've got this consistent shape. So there is a method to why she's pairing images like she is. That's good. That's good picture editing right there. But this one kind of gets like lost in the shuffle. And I think that that's a beautiful frame. That's like a mysterious standalone frame that should be broken out on its own. Again, if you got the work, if you got the goods, you got to show it off. So not bad. It's a good start. Again, borders, consistency to those borders, simplifying the spreads and taking your strongest photographs and giving them space, giving them real estate, and letting them breathe. That is really what we're after here. So nice job, Lisa. You are well on your way. All right. Daniel Miller, United Nations. Some of you might have seen this work before. This is a different version of it, but thanks for submitting again, Daniel. The UN has declared 2026 International Year of Rangelands and Pastoralists. I'm working on a book about Mongolian rangelands and nomads. It will describe the unique nomadic culture of Mongolia that is thousands of years old and discuss the challenges facing sustainable use of rangelands. So look at this. Look how different this looks from anything that we've seen, in the sense that we've got a table of contents here. Now, this might be a little large, but you know, I'll leave it alone for now. Again, caption, not mandatory, but Daniel's done a pretty good job of how he's type designed this caption. So I'm going to leave that alone. I'm going to look at these real quick, go through here. Have a look-see here. Saving the step. Okay. All right, back to this. Again, this might be a little large, but I'll leave it alone. If it was me, I would reduce this at least by 50%, and I would go much smaller on the table of contents. This is absolutely fine. Single image, easy to read, nice, colorful, sharp. And yeah, this brings my attention down, but it's also because Mongolian culture is not something I'm super familiar with. This might, it's a pretty good addition. You are blending color and black and white, and that again is okay. It just makes things more complicated, and you want to make sure that you're consistent in how you're using the black and white and the color. What you don't want is for it to be random. You want that to be a very, very straightforward, simple visual hierarchy that the viewer can follow. So if you start this book and you think to yourself, wow, this could be a book of portraiture, and then all of a sudden you go to black and white portraiture, the viewer is going to be like, why is this in color and why is this in black and white? So just something to consider. Maybe these were shot originally in color as well, so you could go consistent on those. But look how simple and clean these are. He's got two images. The horses are kind of, tail to tail. The riders are facing out, single caption. So yes, there's a bit, there's quite a bit going on here, but it's also consumable. Now you're jumping to color. Again, I get it. A landscape, you're giving us a scene setter. I would throw a border on this just to see how it looks, because these other pages are bordered, just to see if it looks a little better consistent there. This too. So now we've got a three-way bleed here. This is where I would say less is more. I might take something like this and I move it onto its own page with the copy to just let this photograph breathe on its own. Just let people consume the photo and then hit them with the calligraphy and the text by itself, just to simplify it a little bit. Same with this. Same with this. And again, you've got one border across the bottom here and a two-way bleed. I would keep those consistent. I like how this looks a lot. There's one thing I would think about, which is to divide this into two columns of text instead of one. I think it will really help with legibility. And I think it will look a little more sophisticated than having it go all the way across. And I would probably also make sure that my text here aligned with the top of this photograph as well, just to keep things consistent there. And let's see here. This is the spread that I would probably take out. I don't think this fits the overall look and feel of the publication. I think the other work is so much stronger than this. This could be a secondary thing, or super cool, you could do a poster of these and then fold the poster up and have it as an insert or a pullout to the book itself. That could be really cool. Or do a secondary, really small publication about this that slips into the bigger publication. But I think the spread is it's inconsistent. And again, it's so different from the rest of the spreads that I would probably take it out and figure out a way to use it in a different way. Because again, like, look at this compared to the rest. This fits like perfectly with the rest of the work, and this just feels a bit kind of out of right field. Love this. How infrequently have we seen this tonight? Image across the gutter. Look how good that looks. He's giving this image space to breathe. And look, you're not losing anything in the gutter. Yes, we know the horse has a head and a tail, and we know that most likely it has a middle as well. We don't necessarily need to see it. So love this. I think it's a little more sophisticated. I would even suggest leaving this alone, moving this to another page. And if you needed, leave this little caption here for this photograph, totally fine. But I would probably move this to a different page. Because this is really nice, show it off. Again, really good. The one glaring thing for me is this one, probably take it out. 2 columns on the text, keep your borders consistent, and I would move these to other pages. But a really good start, and I love this project. I think it's pretty interesting. Can't wait to see where you go from here. We got about 15 minutes left. I'm going to try to hurry through these, but I don't want to go too fast because this is a very different project. I want you to look at this. Okay. Look at the amount of white space. White space is not empty space. This is a thing. This white space is equal to this. Okay. Think about that. This is not blank. That is an object. This white space is an object, just as this is. So look at how simple this is. Start with a quote. Photographs. Actually, this I think is the second spread. So imagine this one's not here, and just go from here to here. How simple, clean. That's a really nice photograph, by the way. Simple images. Title. Half title page. Look at that type treatment. Really nice. Simple, clean, beautiful, 2 column, easy to read, the right size, really well done. Look at the color change here. Look at the density change in gray here. Look at that. That's really nice. Simple, clean, easy to read. And then 2 photographs on the page. I could argue that both of these photographs are good enough to be on their own. But there is, look at this, the arm pointing this way. That's good. You've got the same 2 boys that you have here. You have a nice moment. I don't know what he's doing. He's doing little boy things. We're inexplicable at times. Really nice. Framing through the flowers here. That's super solid. Again, simple, making us think about why these images are paired together. This is kind of what I would call classic photo essay style, but with a very nice treatment of type. I think if I'm going to nitpick and find the weakest spread, it's this one. Not to say it doesn't belong, but man, these others like that is so, look at that. What are you going to look at? You got one thing to look at right here. And that's a really nice moment, nice frame, great light. Like that's a keeper. Simple, clean image pairings. I think your type treatment is stellar. Like this is really good. All you need to do now is just keep shooting and make sure that you can justify every single one of these images as why they need to be there. And in some cases like this, you may need to break this out, leave it on its own and move this to another spread, you know, because there's quite a bit going on here. And yes, the arm's moving across, but this image, don't know. And the other nitpicky thing is I would probably open these files up just a little bit. I would brighten them just a tiny bit. But man, that's like, you know, for everyone watching, I think type-wise, this is a really good thing to keep in mind. Like this, I think to me is a very professional use of text, and it's legible and placed well. Everything about this is super solid. And these little details, color change, density change, those things are really important for visual hierarchy. Nice job. All right, 2 more. Nick has, oh, this is a really, really impactful story. It's a project he's working on called 49 Days, structured around 49-day period following the death of his mom. Sorry to hear about your mom's passing. He's got a lot about his process here. This is a really well done description of what the project is. The plan is to test Blurb as a zine, post as a sequential story on Instagram, then review to making a book. I'd really appreciate any feedback, radical or otherwise. Again, this is really a well done description, and it's heartfelt and really fantastic. So let's have a look here. I love the fact that he threw in the overall design. This is such a fun thing to think about sequencing and editing. But let's move here. Okay, super simple. Obviously, like-minded photographs. More tree. Okay, you've got, you know, parallel lines here. That's a good image pairing right there. Love this. This is like, so I've looked at this many times, trying to figure out what it is exactly, but that's such a dynamic picture that I keep coming back to. Love this image pairing. Super simple, clean graphic. It is a mix of color and black and white, but it works because both images are very easy reads. I would think about flipping these, maybe put these people on the right so they're walking into the frame. There is one thing that dramatically jumps out at me, Nick, which is I'm not digging these. I would immediately eliminate those. I just think they're a distraction and the photos are too good. What you wrote in your description is critical to have in the book. So if I go back here and down here, I can see like a little bit of text, but it's not enough. I like this. I like that treatment. But what I need to see here and down here is what you wrote in your description. I need to know who you are, what this is, what the project's about, maybe something about your mom. I need the text to help me fill in the blank spaces. Your photography is really good. I really like the photography. I think it's solid. Your images are paired together. You got nice, clean, simple, you know, I've got one image to look at. If there's just a little reminder throughout this book as to what your mom meant, what she was about, what these images, why these pictures, specific pictures are there, it's going to be an amazing book. So yeah, just keep doing that. I just don't like these at all. There's got to be a better way to include that information, whether it's a completely different size typeface and placement and density, but just keep working with that because the work itself is great and the project is super solid. So it's really nice. Again, sorry about your mom. Okay, Christine, last one. Project is exploring the beauty and tragedy of litter. I love this, specifically how pieces of plastic end up in nature. These images are made from a beach in Uglarp on the west coast of Sweden. That sounds very Swedish. I'm planning to incorporate photos from other beaches as well. I think that's a great idea, but let's have a start here. She's starting with this clock tower, which is hilarious to me. It looks like it's in the middle of nowhere. And I was like, hey, what time is it? Maybe this is a Sweden thing. I don't know. I've never been there. Okay, let's have a look here. I love the project with litter. I think this has got serious legs because, man, do we love to litter. Okay. Litter. There's some repetitive shapes, which I like. It's almost as much about, landscape and earth as a texture as it is about litter. The one thing, Christina, that I would say immediately is I would reduce these to one image per spread, because these require a little bit of time. Like, I want to start reading what's on that. And I want to give this picture time so that I'm not immediately feel like I need to check out the other page. I would probably, and if we go back here and just look overall at this spread, you see how it's just photo, 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 photo. You definitely want to break up the cadence. So instead of having just two photos, you want, single image on the left-hand page, single image on the right-hand page, then a double. Like this one makes sense as a double because you kind of have these circular patterns over here, and then you've got this perfect circle here. So maybe this makes sense as an image pairing, but I would then break these next ones out and let them breathe a little bit. And also you're going to want to add, if I go back here, text. Again, I want to see an introduction. I would love, even scientific data about the amount of litter, the chemicals involved. What's Sweden's national plan for combating what litter is. All of that stuff will make this even stronger. But I think image-wise, it's lonely. You look at things like this and just wonder, how did the litter get all the way out on these beaches when there's no one there? It's just bizarre. But it's a great project. It has a million different angles to it that I think would be beautiful. I would just let these images breathe more and break up the cadence, because there's a lot of information happening here. But otherwise, super solid, and keep going, because this is unfortunately a problem that's not going away anytime soon. So that was the list. Again, thank you for everybody that submitted. I'm just one person with one opinion, but I do look at a ton of books. And we've got a few minutes for questions. And so if we've got a question that we want to pop up here, any tips for making type design readable for people with vision difficulties? That's a good question. I always err on a smaller typeface, which is not going to help readability for people with vision difficulties. Other than increasing type size, I'm not sure. I don't have any scientific data or any specifics in terms of how to do that. I don't know if there's a specific color of typeface that would be easier for people to read, if increasing contrast with text would make it easier, or if it's as simple as making things slightly larger than normal. So it's a really good question. I don't have anything super specific on that. I apologize for that. Let's see, what else do we have? When you're preparing your photos for a BookWrite book, do you set your layout and aspect ratios before you export your photos? I end up going back and forth. When you're preparing your photos in BookWrite, do you set your layout and aspect ratios before you export your photos? So my aspect ratio, I choose in camera while I'm shooting. So right now my Fuji X106 is at 16:9 and my Nikon is at 3:2. That's consistent. And then I export, those all stay the same, whether they're exported from the camera or from Lightroom. So I just keep everything consistent. I typically don't change aspect ratios while I'm in the field, and I try not to change aspect ratios within one project. My Morocco work in October is all 16:9. My Japan work is all 3:2. My Patagonia work is all 3:2. I don't mix and match those, again, because I'm trying to stay consistent and make sure that the work is legible to as many people as possible and not all over the place. Sometimes if you're making a book for photographers are really keen to see all those different things and they'll notice it, whereas the public just kind of goes, why is everything a different shape? Okay, what else? What do we got here? Is rotating a landscape image 90 degrees to fit on a portrait page taboo? That's a great question. Look, I don't care what's taboo, because just because something is considered taboo, I don't know about you, makes me want to do it. So I wouldn't say that it's taboo. A friend of mine is a founder of a publishing company. He said to me, look, book design has a ton of rules, and every single one of them is breakable if you justify why you break it. So this is a really important thing. You all have to know how to speak about your work. So let's say that Kent rotates a horizontal picture vertical on the page, and I'm looking at his book and I come to it and I go, why'd you do that? And if he says, I don't know, that's one answer, but not a good one. But if he says, oh, I did it because I wanted you to physically turn the book in your hands, because that way you're going to be more enamored with my book, and I'm physically making you do something, whether I agree with the design choice or not, he's explaining why he did it. That's really important. You can break every rule out there if you have a good explanation for why you did it. It's a great question. Just real quick, is 3 different photo ratios too much for a photo book? Most likely. Okay. Can you load additional fonts into Bookright? Yes, you can. So I use fonts from a variety of different sources, which is something I highly recommend. And you can often import those into, you basically import the typeface into your fonts folder on your computer, and then close Bookright, open Bookright, and most of the fonts will appear there. There are certain fonts that won't. And also be very careful about what fonts you choose and make sure that you're not infringing on anyone's usage situation. So I will often choose fonts that are free for personal use, or I will choose a font where I can make a donation to the font designer and then I can use that in a book. So just be careful with that. But yes, you can load additional fonts. Is 3 different photo ratios too much for a photo book? Yeah, it really is. Again, you want consistency, because remember, you and I look at photographs or maybe photographs all day long because we love photography, but the average person probably doesn't, or they just look at stuff online, Instagram or whatever. So it's a lot. I don't remember making a book in recent memory where I used a bunch of different aspect ratios. It's just too much. Just keep it simple, Do a book, one of each. Okay, we got 4 minutes left. Sometimes more than one image needs to be on a page spread to tell a story. Say a sequence of action without being too busy. How many would be enough? That's a really good question. So yeah, sometimes it's nice. I did a story on Portuguese bloodless bullfighting once, and first guy that I photographed got absolutely drilled by the bull and flipped up in the air. It was kind of a dramatic thing. So I originally had that on. I'd like the main photo on the left-hand page. Then I had a bunch of the leading up photos. But then I realized all I needed was the one, him upside down above the bull. It was a pretty easy read. This guy just got worked by this 1,000-pound toro, and he's completely upside down, and it was a pretty easy read. So I thought I needed that motor drive sequence, but I didn't. But there are times, to your point, that you might need that. Again, always err on, you want the fewest photos possible to tell that story. So what you thought you might need 6 or 8 pictures of a Formula One car going through a corner, when really you need 2. So just always lean towards less is more. All right. I think we are getting close. For those of you who are thanking me and the Blurb team, you are very welcome. This will be posted on YouTube, and you can watch it at a later date. And we really appreciate you being here. Also, reach out to us and tell us what you liked or didn't like about this, unless it has to do with me, and then it has to be positive praise. No, you can write us, tell us what you think. Also, write us and tell us what you'd like to see at future events, because we're always looking to make sure you guys get your questions answered. And there's also a 30% off book code here if you want to give a test. And remember, you don't have to make War and Peace the first time out. Just make something small and fun and keep it light. And Colin, we are definitely going to be bringing you more of this. And yeah, really appreciate it, and really happy to see people tuning in from all over the world. We appreciate you folks in Europe who are staying up late to be here, or those of you in Asia who are just waking up. Much appreciated. And I will be here. I'm working on Patagonia books right now, sample books, one of each, 100 pages, trying to figure out what I'm doing after all these years. I still don't know. I'm still learning just like all of you. So thanks again, and we will see you next time.